A young mother came home from a grocery store and vanished under mysterious circumstances. When police began their investigation, they thought the answer to the mystery was pretty obvious. But what they uncovered shocked even the most seasoned detectives, as none of them could have predicted what was coming. Kelsey Berreth was born on September 15, 1989, in Moses Lake, Washington. She grew up on a farm with her parents and older brother, helping with all kinds of chores from a young age. She loved working on the farm, but what fascinated her most were the crop dusting planes, those small aircraft that sprayed fields or scattered seeds. Kelsey had always dreamed of flying one, and as soon as she graduated high school, she enrolled in a local college to become a pilot. After earning her license, she got a job as a flight instructor while still helping her parents on the farm. Teaching people how to fly and working with her family kept her busy, but more than anything, Kelsey dreamed of having a family of her own. In 2016, when Kelsey was 27, she finally got the chance to start the family she'd always dreamed of. She met a man named Patrick online, and they hit it off right away. Like Kelsey, he was a farmer, and he shared her desire to have a big family. They talked for months before Kelsey decided to move to Colorado to be with him, and around the same time, they got engaged. Shortly after settling in, she landed a job as a flight instructor at a prestigious aviation school that specialized in training military pilots. It was a great opportunity, but there was one downside. The school was in another city, about 70 miles from Patrick's farm. Because of the long commute, Kelsey rented a place in town called Woodland Park. It was closer to work, but still within a reasonable distance from Patrick's home. Even though they had to live apart, they spent as much time together as possible, and their relationship moved quickly. In early 2017, Kelsey found out that she was pregnant, and soon after, the couple welcomed a baby girl. It seemed like Kelsey's dream of having a family was finally coming true. But not long after their daughter was born, things between her and Patrick started to fall apart. She noticed he was growing distant, pulling away from her, losing interest in their relationship, and showing less and less enthusiasm about their life together. Still, Kelsey wasn't ready to give up. She was determined to make things work and did everything she could to fix their relationship. On the morning of November 22, 2018, Thanksgiving Day, Kelsey planned to cook dinner for the holiday. She called her mom that morning, chatting about her plans and mentioning that she was heading to the grocery store to pick up ingredients for the meal. Over the next few days, Kelsey sent a few text messages to her mom, but then, out of nowhere, she stopped responding. At first, her mother assumed she was just busy. After all, Kelsey had a job and a 1-year-old daughter to take care of. But as the days passed and Kelsey continued to ignore calls and messages, her mom started to worry. Nearly a week had gone by without a single word from her. Growing increasingly concerned, she reached out to her older brother, hoping he had heard from Kelsey. But he said she hadn't responded to him either. Desperate for answers, Kelsey's mother decided to call Patrick, thinking he might know what was going on. But his response only made things more confusing. He claimed that he and Kelsey had broken up. According to Patrick, their breakup happened on Thanksgiving, more than a week earlier. He claimed that before the holiday, Kelsey told him she needed some time alone and wanted to end their relationship. Then, on Thanksgiving Day, she supposedly dropped off their daughter with him, took some of her things from his place, and he hadn't heard from her since. Kelsey's mother found his story hard to believe. For one, she couldn't imagine her daughter leaving her 1-year-old child behind without checking in, even once. And second, she had spoken to Kelsey on the very same day Patrick claimed all of this happened. Kelsey never mentioned a breakup. In fact, she had seemed completely fine. She was in good spirits and excited about cooking Thanksgiving dinner. Feeling uneasy, Kelsey's mom asked Patrick to go to her house and check on her. He agreed, but said he needed to finish up some work on the farm first. But the call never came. He never followed up. At that point, Kelsey's mother knew something wasn't right, so she made the decision to contact the police. She explained the situation, and the local department sent an officer to check her home. When they arrived, they found Kelsey's car parked outside, but there was no sign of her. No one answered the door, and since the police couldn't enter without a warrant, there wasn't much they could do. All they could tell Kelsey's mom was that her daughter wasn't there. However, officers did speak with Patrick, and he stuck to the same story. Kelsey had supposedly left him, saying she needed space. But this time, he added a new detail. She had taken some of her things from his house, including her handgun. He claimed she had been acting strangely in the days before she disappeared and said he was worried she might have done something drastic. The police asked for access to Kelsey's home, and what they found inside only raised more questions. All of her belongings were still there: her clothes, documents, and other essentials she would have taken if she had left on her own. But one thing was missing: her car keys. Her car was parked outside, yet the keys were nowhere to be found. That didn't make much sense. It was hard to imagine a scenario where Kelsey would take her keys but leave her vehicle behind. At this point, the local police department decided to officially open an investigation into her disappearance. One of the first steps was obtaining data from her phone. When investigators checked its GPS history, they found that the last signal from Kelsey's phone had been recorded on November 25th, 3 days after she was last seen. It came from a small town called Gooding. The problem was that Gooding was in Idaho, about 800 miles from Kelsey's home. That didn't add up. When police spoke with her family, they confirmed that Kelsey had no friends, relatives, or any known connections there. They had no idea why she would have gone to such a remote place. Detectives reached out to law enforcement in Gooding for assistance, but their search turned up nothing. In such a small town, a newcomer would have stood out, yet there were no traces of Kelsey. That was odd, and investigators knew they needed to look elsewhere for answers. They reviewed CCTV footage from the grocery store Kelsey had visited on Thanksgiving. The video showed her acting completely normal. There was nothing unusual about her behavior. She wasn't in a hurry, didn't seem distressed, and certainly didn't look like someone planning to disappear. She picked up groceries for dinner and even bought a flower before leaving the store. Police conducted another search of Kelsey's home, but once again, they found no clues. Days passed without any breakthroughs, and in that time, Kelsey's mother and brother flew to Colorado to help with the search. They stayed at her house, and right away, her mother had an unsettling feeling. Something just didn't seem right. But she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. Then, one day, Kelsey's older brother went to use the bathroom and happened to notice something red on the inside of the toilet. It caught his attention, and when he looked closer, he realized it could be blood. He immediately reported it to the police, and tests confirmed his suspicion. It was human blood. But this discovery was just the beginning. Investigators had already searched the house once, but their examination had been fairly basic. This time, forensics decided to use luminol, a chemical that reveals traces of blood, even if it has been wiped away or cleaned to the point of being invisible to the human eye. They started spraying luminol in the bathroom, and what they saw was truly chilling. There was blood everywhere. It had been cleaned, but under the chemical reaction, it lit up across the walls and floor. The same thing happened in the living room. There were large stains of wiped away blood, revealing a gruesome scene that had been carefully scrubbed from sight. Samples were sent to the lab, and the results confirmed what investigators feared most. The blood belonged to Kelsey. But there was something else. Among the samples, forensic experts discovered 2 additional DNA profiles, one belonging to a man, the other to a woman. At this point, detectives were almost certain Kelsey was no longer alive. Their focus now shifted to identifying the 2 unknown individuals whose DNA had been found in her home. Naturally, Patrick became the prime suspect. Investigators had already found his version of events suspicious, but now that they were almost certain Kelsey was dead, their doubts about him only grew stronger. When they got access to Patrick's phone, they saw that he had been calling and texting Kelsey up until November 25th, the day she stopped responding to everyone else. Their messages mostly revolved around their breakup, but there was nothing particularly useful in the exchange. However, detectives were already leaning toward a different timeline. They believed Kelsey had actually been killed on Thanksgiving, November 22nd. The problem was that aside from those text messages, there was no real evidence that she had been alive for the next 3 days. That raised a terrifying possibility. Kelsey might have been murdered shortly after returning home from the grocery store, and if that was the case, someone else had been using her phone to send those messages. That's when detectives noticed something interesting. Patrick had repeatedly called a phone number with a Gooding area code, both before and after Kelsey disappeared. Wanting to know more, they traced the number and found that it belonged to a woman named Crystal. Investigators called her and asked how she knew Patrick. Crystal explained that they were essentially business partners. they co-owned several horses. When asked when she had last seen him, she initially claimed she couldn't remember, but after some hesitation, she admitted that they were supposed to meet right after Thanksgiving. According to her, she and Patrick had planned to buy another horse, so she drove to Colorado to see it herself. However, along the way, she found out that Patrick didn't have enough money for the purchase, so she turned around and went back home. Considering that the drive from her town to Patrick's was almost 1,000 miles, detectives found Crystal's story suspicious. It seemed unlikely that someone would embark on such a long road trip just to see a new horse. Adding to their doubts, Crystal claimed she hadn't even used her own car for the trip. Instead, she had borrowed a friend's vehicle because it was more fuel efficient. That detail felt oddly specific, almost as if she was trying to justify why her car wouldn't show up on any traffic cameras or toll records. Before ending the conversation, detectives asked Crystal if she knew Kelsey. She responded that she had heard about her on the news, but had never met her in person. That statement immediately raised red flags. Crystal lived in another state, and at that point, Kelsey's disappearance hadn't yet made national headlines. So how would she have already heard about it? After wrapping up their call with Crystal, investigators decided to dig deeper into her background. They discovered that she had recently gone through a divorce, so they reached out to her ex-husband, hoping he could provide more insight. When detectives asked Crystal's ex-husband if he knew Patrick, his response completely contradicted what Crystal had told them. He revealed that she and Patrick had known each other since 2006. Patrick was actually her first love. Over the years, they had an on and off relationship, but had always stayed in touch. Even more suspicious, her ex-husband claimed that their affair had never truly ended, not even after he and Crystal got married. According to him, she was still seeing Patrick in 2017, the same year he got engaged to Kelsey. But that wasn't all. Crystal had also lied to her ex-husband about her whereabouts after Thanksgiving. At first, she told him she had gone to visit friends from November 24th to 25th, but after the police contacted her, she finally admitted to him that she had actually been in Colorado. Then came another suspicious detail. On December 4th, Crystal asked her ex-husband to go with her to buy a new phone, claiming she had lost hers. Detectives immediately took note of the timing. December 4th was the exact same day they had obtained Patrick's phone for investigation. With all this information, investigators had enough evidence to obtain a warrant for Crystal's DNA sample. They flew to Idaho to collect it, and while Crystal complied with the request, she flat out refused to answer any of their questions. As they waited for the lab results, detectives reached out to the friend who had lent Crystal her car for the trip to Colorado. She allowed them to inspect the vehicle and mentioned that she kept a handgun inside. When investigators checked the gun, they noticed something alarming. One bullet was missing from the magazine. The friend was adamant that the gun had been fully loaded when she lent Crystal the car, and she had no idea where the missing bullet had gone. But this was just the tip of the iceberg. Investigators then spoke with another one of Crystal's friends, a woman named Michelle, and what she told them completely turned the case on its head. Michelle revealed that Crystal had called her in late October, about a month before Kelsey disappeared, and told her something shocking. Through tears, Crystal confided that Patrick had asked her to kill his fiancée. According to Michelle, Patrick told Crystal that Kelsey was mistreating their daughter. He insisted that he couldn't do it himself because it would be too obvious, and he needed someone else to carry out the murder. During the conversation, Michelle urged Crystal to go to the police, but she never did. This revelation completely changed the course of the investigation. Police were now almost certain that both Patrick and Crystal were somehow involved in Kelsey's murder. But despite the mounting evidence, they still had no DNA results and, more importantly, no concrete proof of what had actually happened to Kelsey. As investigators continued searching for more evidence, the case took another unexpected turn. Crystal called them and said that she had hired a lawyer and was ready to talk. When detectives met with her, she didn't hesitate and dropped a bombshell. Crystal admitted that Patrick had killed Kelsey and confessed to cleaning up the crime scene afterward. According to Crystal, Patrick had been planning Kelsey's murder for months, but from the very beginning, he had intended for Crystal to be the one to carry it out. Just as she had told her friend Michelle, Patrick repeatedly insisted that Kelsey was abusing their daughter, using drugs, and drinking excessively. He convinced Crystal that getting rid of her was the only option. Crystal agreed to help Patrick. and 2 months before Kelsey's disappearance, they came up with their first plan. The idea was simple. Crystal would poison Kelsey's favorite coffee with some medication. Since Crystal was a nurse, she had easy access to the necessary drugs. But there was one big problem. Crystal and Kelsey had never met. To get around this, she and Patrick came up with a cover story. Crystal would pretend to be a new neighbor who had just moved to the area and was introducing herself to the locals. In September, she put their plan into motion. She grabbed Kelsey's favorite coffee, went to her house, and knocked on the door. When Kelsey answered, they made small talk for a few minutes before Crystal handed her the drink and said goodbye. But Crystal actually couldn't go through with it. She hadn't poisoned the coffee. She just wanted to see Kelsey in person. And just like that, their first attempt failed. Patrick's next plan was more direct. Crystal was supposed to drive to his farm, pick up a metal pipe he had prepared, go to Kelsey's house, and kill her. She drove nearly 1,000 miles, picked up the pipe, and even pulled up outside Kelsey's house. But once again, she couldn't go through with it. She sat there for a while, then drove off without ever stepping out of the car. But Patrick didn't give up. His third plan was almost identical to the last one, but this time, instead of a pipe, he left a baseball bat for Crystal to use. Once again, she took the long drive, picked up the weapon, and approached Kelsey's house. And once again, she couldn't go through with it. At that point, Patrick realized if he wanted Kelsey dead, he would have to do it himself. According to Crystal, it all happened in the afternoon on Thanksgiving Day. Patrick showed up at Kelsey's house with a twisted plan. He told her he had bought several holiday-scented candles and suggested they play a game. She would be blindfolded and try to guess the different scents. Kelsey went along with it, completely unaware of what was about to happen. As soon as Patrick tied the blindfold over her eyes, he grabbed the baseball bat and carried out the murder. What made it even more horrifying was that their 1-year-old daughter was in the next room the entire time. After killing Kelsey, Patrick placed her body in a large plastic container and loaded it into the trunk of his car. Then, as if nothing had happened, he took his daughter and drove to his family's Thanksgiving dinner. While his relatives gathered around the table laughing and celebrating, Kelsey's body sat just a few yards away, hidden inside his vehicle. After dinner, Patrick drove out to a small town called Cripple Creek, where he had rented a barn, and left Kelsey's body there for several days. That same night, he called Crystal and told her she needed to come and clean up the mess he had made. She immediately understood. Kelsey was dead. Trying to cover her tracks, Crystal borrowed her friend's car, thinking it might help throw off investigators if the police ever looked into it. She then gathered a stash of cleaning supplies and set off for Colorado. While she was on the road, Patrick called her again. This time, he had a specific request. He warned her to be extra careful because he couldn't find one of Kelsey's teeth. He didn't want it turning up somewhere it shouldn't, especially not in front of Kelsey's family. When Crystal stepped into Kelsey's home, she was met with a horrifying scene. There was blood everywhere. It covered the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. She spent over 4 hours scrubbing the place, but some stains were impossible to remove, even with heavy-duty cleaning chemicals. So she gathered anything that had blood on it, rags, towels, and other items, stuffed them into garbage bags, and loaded them into her car. After finishing the cleanup, she casually stopped at a cafe for something to eat before heading to meet Patrick. They stopped at a gas station, where Patrick filled up a canister with gasoline. Then, they drove to the barn, retrieved Kelsey's body, and took it back to Patrick's farm. There, they built a fire and burned her remains. As they stood by the flames, Patrick's mother stepped outside. She watched them for a while, but whether she realized what was really happening remains unknown. Before Crystal left for home, Patrick handed her Kelsey's phone. For the next few days, she responded to texts from Kelsey's family and friends, trying to keep up the illusion that Kelsey was still alive. But eventually, she got rid of the phone, destroying the last trace of Kelsey's connection to the outside world. Despite helping Patrick cover up a brutal murder, Crystal insisted that she hadn't acted of her own free will. She claimed she had been terrified of becoming his next victim and only did what he asked out of fear for her life and for her children's lives. She said Patrick had threatened to harm them if she didn't cooperate. Before ending her confession, Crystal added that she had actually tried to help police catch Patrick. She claimed that she had deliberately left a few bloodstains in Kelsey's home, hoping investigators would find them, but detectives were highly skeptical of this claim. Crystal had countless opportunities to go to the police and prevent the murder. Instead, she not only allowed Patrick to go through with it, but had been willing to kill Kelsey herself 3 separate times. And even after Patrick carried out the murder, she didn't come forward. She helped him clean up the crime scenes, dispose of the body, and mislead Kelsey's family and friends. In the end, her confession wasn't motivated by guilt or a sense of justice. The truth was, her lawyer had advised her to take a plea deal, one that would drop all charges against her except for a single count of evidence tampering related to destroying Kelsey's phone. Despite Crystal's detailed confession, police still needed solid physical evidence to take the case to trial. They had already searched Patrick's farm once and found nothing incriminating. But this time, with Crystal's help, they returned to the property, and she pointed out the exact spot where they had burned Kelsey's remains. Patrick had done a thorough job of covering it up, so investigators had to dig through layers of dirt and ash. Eventually, forensic experts uncovered traces of a burned body. However, there was almost nothing left that could be used for DNA analysis. The only piece of evidence was the tooth Crystal had found while cleaning up the crime scene. But even that was so badly damaged by fire, investigators couldn't conclusively prove it belonged to Kelsey. Still, there was one crucial breakthrough. By this time, the lab results from the DNA samples found in Kelsey's home had come in. The results confirmed what detectives already suspected. The 2 unidentified profiles belonged to Patrick and Crystal. That was the final piece of evidence they needed. Patrick was eventually arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He spent the next years behind bars while prosecutors built their case against him, refusing to admit any guilt. According to the prosecution, Patrick had multiple motives for wanting Kelsey dead. First, their relationship was falling apart, and he wanted nothing more to do with her. But since they had a child together, simply walking away wasn't an option, so he decided to get rid of her permanently. The second motive was financial. Patrick was struggling with some serious money problems and was at risk of losing part of his farming business. Investigators believe this could have also played a role in his decision to kill Kelsey. Even though prosecutors couldn't pinpoint a single clear-cut motive, by the time of the trial, investigators had gathered undeniable proof of Patrick's guilt. One of the biggest pieces of evidence came from his phone records. Data from his smartphone showed that he had spent several hours at Kelsey's home on the day of her murder. This directly contradicted his claim that he had only stopped by for a few minutes to pick up their daughter and drop off some of her belongings. CCTV footage from a neighbor's house further discredited his story. The video showed Patrick arriving at Kelsey's home with their daughter, but instead of leaving shortly after, as he claimed, he didn't come back outside for several hours. Then came another damning detail. After leaving Kelsey's home, Patrick's phone traveled to his farm, but Kelsey's phone moved with him. He hadn't even bothered to turn it off. For the next few days, Kelsey's phone remained near Patrick's, tracking alongside his movements, until he finally handed it off to Crystal, who had used it to send misleading texts before destroying it. On top of all this, detectives uncovered a wealth of surveillance footage linking Patrick to the crime. One camera captured him driving with the large plastic container, the same one he later used to hide Kelsey's body. Another camera at the gas station recorded him and Crystal filling up a gas canister, further confirming their involvement in destroying the remains. Then, during the trial, another disturbing detail came to light. An employee at a mobile carrier store testified that Patrick had come in on the same day police confiscated his phone, asking a very suspicious question. He wanted to know how to remotely wipe all data from a device. But perhaps the most damning testimony came from someone inside the jail. One of Patrick's cellmates revealed that, while awaiting trial, Patrick had made a hit list. On it were 3 names: Crystal, her ex-husband, and Kelsey's mother. He wanted them dead. All of this left no doubt. Patrick wasn't just guilty, but he was still dangerous. Given the overwhelming evidence against him, along with Crystal's testimony, the jury unanimously found Patrick guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 156 years. As for Crystal, her plea deal got her an incredibly lenient sentence, just 3 years in prison. But a judge later reduced it to 18 months, with the possibility of early release after only a year. In the end, she served barely any time and has been free for a long time, despite the fact that she could have stopped the crime, but instead, she helped cover it up. On a more hopeful note, Kelsey's family was granted full custody of her daughter, and she has been living with them ever since. In honor of Kelsey's passion for flying, her parents also established a non-profit that provides support to aspiring pilots, ensuring that her legacy lives on. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and don't forget to press the like button if you enjoyed my video. Thank you for watching.